tomorrow. That ends the debate on this agenda point, and that brings us to the discussion of the state of small-scale fisheries in Europe. And we give the floor to the rapporteur.
Thank you, Madam President. When the European institutions talk about small-scale coastal fisheries, we need to bear in mind that it wakes up 35% of the sector, and we need more than just rhetoric and fine words. The centralization of the CFP and the setting up of funds for fisheries need to have been drifting far away from what the small-scale fishing sector needs. For decades, the industrial fishing sector grew, and there was a move towards greater privatization of resources, and this segment is now struggling ever more. Limited access to funds. Only about 7% of the funds for the sector actually reached small-scale fisheries. If you look at activities linked to the vessels, 25%, 3/4 of the fleet are less capitalized, and there's high red tape and bureaucratic burden, limited eligibility. All of these problems have been flagged up and must be tackled. The aging population of fishermen. We're seeing an average age of the age of 32 and an obsolete fleet, leading to rising costs for operational costs. We don't want any false concessions when it comes to this support. Low incomes for this sector, and we're seeing the intermediaries, the middlemen, creaming off the profit, and the fishermen themselves left with very little. We are seeing the margins being squeezed, and the price isn't reflected in the final consumer price. Fuel costs have also put pressure on the incomes of fishermen, and the funding from the EMFF are absolutely crucial to supplement their income. The sector is, of course, a more sustainable sector, both socially and environmentally speaking. We need to reverse the centralization trend that we've seen and move to decentralization and take into account the full complexity and diversity of small-scale fishing. Small-scale fishing, we have great diversity in terms of the fish and the gear that's being used. It's closer to the people, and the national member states need greater powers and move away from the logic of concentration in the sector, move towards a policy that's going to be based on appropriate scientific evidence and provide supported by the food security policies and logic that we are seeing, and support people working in the fishing sector, improve working conditions and living conditions for fishermen in the sector. Now, these are just some of the things that the sector is asking for and that are necessary that we've set out in the report. I note the absence of the responsible commissioner for this policy area. I thank the shadow rapporteurs for their very good cooperation on these issues, even if we didn't manage to go as far as would have been necessary on some points. We have some very important recommendations for small-scale fishing. And now we need to put all of these recommendations into action. Thank you.
Kommission, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the Commission. Commissioner Vălean.
Madam President, honourable members, I would like to thank the rapporteur, Mr. Pimenta Lopes, and the shadow rapporteurs for this report. The Commission welcomes the European Parliament's contribution on the important topic of small-scale fisheries in the EU and future perspectives. As you rightly recall in your report, the small-scale and coastal fishing fleet represents nearly 75% of all fishing vessels registered in the EU and nearly half of the employment in the fishing sector. This clearly shows the important socio-economic role of this sector in European coastal communities and the outmost regions. Your report calls for a broader definition of small-scale and coastal fisheries in a horizontal piece of legislation like the Common Fisheries Policy. Due to the size of the sector, the geographic differences across Europe, and differences in the type of fishing conducted, this would be a difficult task. The existing specific references in the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund already facilitate access to EU funding for small-scale fishers, while the references in the control regulation are specific to control needs. I agree with your draft report that small-scale, unfortunately, often also means small voice in the value chain and in relation to other stakeholders. And I also agree that a large part of the solution lies in a better collective organization of small-scale operators to have a more collective weight and a louder voice. This is why the Commission adopted the rules for the advisory councils in 2022 to ensure more participation of small-scale and coastal fisheries. And this is also the reason why the Commission strongly encourages Member States under the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, as well as the new European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, to support collective organization of producers, organizations and fisheries local action groups. I want to underline in this context that Member States have the possibility to provide preferential rates of support under the new EMFAF, and they should use this possibility. Support can also be applied for the installation of storage, freezing and refrigeration infrastructure on small-scale vessels, as long as they comply with the conditions for vessel modifications, as defined in the regulation on the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. However, and here I need to be clear, the Commission cannot agree with establishing new criteria in relation to the fishing capacity. In most Member States, there is available capacity within the capacity ceilings set by the Common Fisheries Policy. And this could very well be used to increase the capacity of vessels in order to improve safety, living and working conditions on board, or for more energy-efficient propulsion systems. Again, our fund foresees financial support here. So, the Commission could not agree more with your report that young fishers need to be attracted to this important economic sector and that upgrading skills and training play a crucial role here. In this context, the financial support available must be pointed out again, and I would like to encourage Member States to use it. And we have taken careful note also of the other proposals contained in your report to improve the situation of small-scale and coastal fishers, who are indeed part of Europe's fishing and maritime heritage, and the Commission will carefully examine them. But my main message today is that the Commission fully supports all initiatives to strengthen the role of small-scale and coastal fishers in parallel to our continuous and joint efforts to further reduce the environmental impact of those fisheries. I thank you for your attention. I look forward to hear your views. I gave you the message of my colleague Commissioner Sinkevičius, of course, but everything you will say it will be duly noted, and I will pass your message to him. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. This brings us to the first round of comments from the political groups. Mr. Mato is the next speaker.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Well, I'm happy that we're having this debate, even though it's this late and the last item on the agenda. Let me explain why. A lot of people well, they talk about artisanal fisheries, but when you have to vote on measures and take decisions which encourage the important fleet, so important to so many coastal areas, it remains just on paper. It's clear that artisanal fisheries has specific features, and that's why we don't need to have a conflict with other types of fisheries, but I think member states have to take account of the requirements of artisanal fisheries. I was the rapporteur for a report, and we had special measures planned for these fisheries. There are arguments. There are also legal provisions. All that's lacking is the will to put it into effect. Why do people continue to refuse fishers being able to fish better, not more? Why can't we fund the modernization of an obsolete and unsafe fleet, particularly in the peripheral areas, in order to improve safety, living conditions aboard, and energy efficiency? Why, when we're sharing out the quotas as for bluefin tuna, or tuna, why do we not take account of this fleet, which is actually the most sustainable of all of them? Commissioner, fisher people are expecting answers, and the associations have an important role to play. They would like to receive some kind of financial support, as producer associations do. So we want reports that don't only provide a diagnosis of the situation for this fleet, but would also provide significant measures which will allow for an enhanced income for fishers. Madam Commissioner, you have before you a new opportunity. Don't fail the fishers once again, because they deserve our full support. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Socialists and Democrats, Ms. Carvalho. Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me begin by congratulating the rapporteur on the work done, as well as the shadow rapporteurs, which we know the figure 76% has been named, but some studies suggest it's over 80% actually of the fleet that's small scale. We know that life at sea is always harder than land-based professions. And we know that fishing is considered a high-risk activity, high risk for these small-scale fishing vessels, given their limited size, meaning that they're very vulnerable when there are weather events or difficulties at sea. And this is why we need policies and coordinated actions that will mitigate those risks, improve safety and comfort on board these vessels, and provide technological solutions and adaptations that will allow these smaller vessels to improve their carbon footprint. Now we're seeing, however, due to the size of the vessels and their gross tonnage, these vessels unfortunately are unable to provide comfortable and safe working conditions for the workers, and that's an inherent risk for fishermen. And this is why we need to rethink our measures and support to the needs of the sector, and adapt it to the needs of the workers in the sector, and adapt the technical upgrades to the needs of these vessels and the needs as expressed by the fishermen who are working on these smaller vessels. So we need to do this for the current and future generations of fishermen and women. Thank you. Thank you. Now, on behalf of Renew Europe, Mr. Karliskind has the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, Commissioner, good evening. In this report, there's some certain solutions set out, or proposed solutions. Thank you for setting out these possible solutions for small-scale coastal fisheries. But honestly, this report should really be a criticism, a critique of what we've been doing for years with the small-scale coastal fisheries. And the communists, you know what self-criticism is. the reality is that we've made it impossible for small-scale coastal fishers to make a living. If we look at the tons of forms they have to fill in and all the legislation they need to use, you've got a discard ban, you've got licenses, access to funds. It's a joke. It is a joke. I want to know, and I would call on the Commission to tell us what percentage of IFAF is actually devoted to small-scale fishers. These fishers are alone on their vessels. When are they supposed to fill in these forms? I'm angry because it's impossible to do this. What's happening in the overseas territories, we've seen in Guadeloupe, fishers who don't know why we're bashing their head against the wall in this way. You talk about freezing the outcome of coastal fisheries, but I'm sorry, but we don't freeze this product, which has a great deal of added value. I'm completely missing the target. It's hard time that you wake up and pull your head out of the sand of the old dogmas, because coastal fisheries is what keeps our coastal regions alive.
An Frau Kollegin Rose für die
Thank you, Ms. Rose, on behalf of the Green Group.
Fraktion.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, colleagues, well, I've listened to you. I think everyone here agrees that small-scale artisanal fishing is crucial to the life of our coastal territories and for the food security of the continent. We agree that small-scale fishers should be defended, that they should be given a bigger share of fishing quotas and maybe should be more involved in decision-making processes. But if I scratch the surface a little, if I read this report in detail, then I really start seriously to question your intentions. How can we claim to defend small-scale fishers and at the same time call for a broadening of the definition of small-scale fishing to include vessels over 12 metres? If we were to do that, the EMFA funding that's currently reserved for small-scale coastal fishing would be completely watered down and there'd only be crumbs left over for small-scale fishing. How can we claim to defend small-scale artisanal fishing without attacking the first major threat hanging over them, industrial fishing, in other words? When an industrial vessel passes through and ravages an entire fishing area, it's the small-scale fishermen, those who can't go and fish elsewhere, who are the first victims. These are the people I'm thinking of today, the people who set up short channels to sell their products at a fair price, those who attack the French state to obtain a fair distribution of the bluefin tuna quota, the liners from the tip of Brittany who require a period of biological rest for bass, and those who fought to ban electrical fishing and who are now fighting for a moratorium on demersal seining. Thanks.
Rose und wir fahren.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rose. Ms. Conte is next for the Identity and Democracy Group.
Grazie Presidente. La direzione...
Thank you, President. Yes, the right direction. I think we've all worked on this report, and it shows that when we pool our forces, we achieve good agreements. Artisanal fishing is the heart of European fisheries. It respects the most longest-lasting values. It's the least polluting one, and it's carried out by our fishers with passion and sacrifice, men and women strong and proud, who guarantee high-quality, healthy products. We have to recognise their value and their good strategies from a social, economic and environmental point of view, which brings about growth in coastal communities and provides jobs. And that's why we wanted to stress the value added of small-scale fisheries to the seas and to our society. Our responses have been clear. We have to provide EMFF funds to modernise vessels and make them safer and improve conditions abroad. We have to promote local products. We have to support women and young people, and we also have to take account of all the other factors which have an impact on the sea, because it's not only fisheries that are undermining our stocks. I would invite the Commission to take account of the European Parliament's position, particularly in the controls regulation and in the future revision of the CFP. Try not to destroy what remains of good, because we have to keep our fisheries alive. Thank you.
Und damit kommen wir zu
Thank you, Ms. Conte. Mr. Ilčić is the next speaker on behalf of the ECR group.
Poštovani kolege,
Dear colleagues, the goal of any economic activity is not only profit, but also development of the community, introducing new generations into the business, solidarity and community. Small-scale coastal fishing is all this, including transmission of tradition. It has cultural importance and, before all, provides us with fresh and healthy food. As a shadow coordinator whose all amendments have been accepted, I believe that this is a good report which supports higher participation of fishermen in adoption of fisheries policies and calls for preservation and further development of small-scale coastal fishing, which in Croatia, for example, makes for over 90% of total fisheries. I am calling on all groups to vote tomorrow against amendments submitted subsequently by the Greens. They propose removal of subsidies for fishermen with fossil fuel-powered vessels. Although there are many such vessels, they make up for only 8% of the tonnage of the European fishing fleet, so the proposed amendments would not do much good, but would literally wipe out small-scale coastal fishing because these fishermen simply cannot afford to buy new vessels. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hazekamp is next on behalf of the Left Group.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President. Small fishing vessels cause less environmental damage than the industrial monster vessels with which European fishers empty the oceans of fish throughout the world. But a lot of small fishing vessels together catch, nevertheless, an awful lot of fish. There are still too many fishers fishing too few fish. Overfishing in Europe and the rest of the world was supposed to stop in 2020, but is still going on. Despite this, Brussels keeps pouring hundreds of millions into subsidies for the fishery sector. There's even a call to continue to exempt the fishery sector, which uses 2 billion litres of fossil fuel per annum, from fuel tax. Such an exemption for fossil fuel is not only a disaster for the oceans, but also for the climate. Therefore, it is essential that the polluter pays, and that also applies to the fisheries sector. And for that reason as well, I feel that European fisheries subsidies should be abolished.
Frau Kollegin, und es schließt sich.
Thank you very much. Ms. Birbergash is next.
Madame la rapporteure, Monsieur.
Madam Rapporteur, and President, colleagues, well, I'm particularly sensitive to small-scale artisanal fisheries questions, sustainable methods used in our seas. So I'd like to thank the rapporteur for this very useful report. I would like to remind you that the European Parliament adopted an initiative report calling on the Commission to bring in measures to renew the traditional fishing. In 2022, in February, once again, a state support scheme was introduced, and Martinique has moved from 1,000 to 450 traditional fishers, and that's a dropping curve that we see elsewhere in the overseas territories. Our traditional fisheries, which are seen for their values and their limited environmental impact, are in their death throes. Now, it's a difficult and not very attractive job these days. There's a lack of training and an aging fisher population. Illegal fishing, and there's pollution. There is a lack of organisation in some of our territories as well, which are undermining this situation. It's really important for me to make this point today. And there's another crucial problem I'd like to raise. In the overseas territories, we apply the same policies applied elsewhere in the European Union. To conclude, 2 more minutes, well, 5 seconds. Given its clout in local economies and given the food habits, artisanal fisheries deserves our particular attention. This is really important to me. and it has to be seen as a crucial activity in the areas where it's conducted. And please, then, we have to allow our fishers to live. Thank you very much indeed. It's really important to us from the overseas territories. Yes, I know, but you've already spoken 1 minute over your time. For the non-attached, I'm a little bit more flexible, but other people as well have to respect their speaking times. We're not going to discuss that here. Thank you. So, colleague Carvalho, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Madam President, Commissioner, Rapporteur, dear colleagues, small-scale coastal fishing has a key role to play in the European Union. It makes up 77% of active vessels and almost 50% of the total fishing sector. Right now, more than 60% of registered vessels are of this type. And these vessels need to benefit from more sustainable regulation. They carry out an important role in the local communities, in coastal communities. And the European Union need to support these small-scale fishermen and operators and do this through effective measures and regulations and specific rules for the sector. The report that we will vote on tomorrow contains very important and useful suggestions and recommendations that will help member states to take bold decisions in this direction. We need to be able to reduce production costs through support to fishermen so that we can cushion the impact of higher fuel costs. We need measures that will allow fishermen to renew and upgrade their fleet. And we also need measures that will be directed at young people so that they can get the adequate training that they need. And now regarding outermost regions, the Azores or Madeira, for example, they play a key role when it comes to maintaining and preserving marine ecosystems. I think it's very important that we re-establish a specific program for outermost regions for the fisheries sector as well. And that will be necessary for the sector as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. And now our colleague, Ms. Avram.
Pescuitul tradițional în Marea Traditional fishery in the Black Sea is also threatened to become extinct. On the Romanian coast and in the Danube Delta, only few fishermen try to keep this activity alive and to make a living out of this profession. But their situation becomes more and more complicated. There's disloyal competition. There's this war in Ukraine that actually put an end to the activity of small fishermen. The danger in the Black Sea is deadly because there are weapons in the sea. And our fishermen need help. The report has some solution for this crisis. For instance, easy access to financing, creating local supply chains, coming with the stimulants for women and for young people to work in this profession, and so on and so forth. But this measure need to be enforced very fast so that we can still talk about traditional fishing at the Black Sea.
Hat das Wort Frau Kollegin Bilbao Barandica.
Our colleague, Ms. Bilbao Barandica, has the floor.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Small-scale fisheries are important when it comes to maintaining the cultural heritage that exists in these coastal communities. They need a definition that will cover the wealth and diversity that and will guarantee access to European programs and support. And we need to make this sector more attractive. And that means that fishermen and women need to enjoy better conditions and enjoy a fair income. and that they're providing healthy and good products to the European market. We need to inform consumers and also improve the working conditions for fishermen working on small-scale vessels. We need financial support to make this possible, and also recognise the role of women in the sector and ensure diversification can take place through digitalisation and innovation. And we want it to bring innovation to the sea. Thank you.
Fort mit Frau Kollegin Miranda. Bitte schön, Sie haben.
Thank you. And our colleague Miranda now has the floor.
Muito obrigada. Saúdo.
Thank you very much. I welcome the work done by Mr. Pimenta in his report. In my country, Galicia, it's a country where women have been active in shellfish gathering for a long time and gathering mussels. And this is a low-impact activity in environmental terms, and it's a sustainable practice that respects the marine ecosystems and the biological characteristics of these various species. Small-scale fishing is very important. In spite of its great importance and significance, is still not getting enough support from EU funds. And we cannot allow this important sector, which generates so many jobs and provides food, the coastal fishing sector, not only depends on sustainable measures, but will, in the long run, also depend on public support and measures. Small-scale fishing sector is asking for recognition, and it wants to be excluded from Brussels-imposed tax and quotas as well. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Und wir fahren fort mit Frau Kollegin.
Thank you. And now our colleague, Ms. Chamier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. The future of small-scale coastal fisheries is in danger because it is in the unfortunate position of being under the competence of the European Commission. So we have this pseudo-ecological arguments, and we have this European unification pressure, and it's against this the fishers have to try and survive. And of course, all they are getting is support to destroy their vessels. There are lots of bans and rules which make their profession impossible, rather. And we have lots of marine parks, and we have a lot of offshore windmills, which means that fishers cannot fish in their own regions. At the time of inflation, we have to make sure that we continue to exempt the fuel they use from tax. And we also have to allow them to work at a local level, which is being banned by the Commission, which wants to import from the ends of the earth. And the competence for fisheries is the sole competence of the Commission, and we need our sovereignty back. Thank you.
Damit kommen wir zu Herrn Kollegen Stankanelli.
Thank you. And now our colleague, Mr. Stancanelli, has the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Commissioner, thank you to the rapporteur. I think we worked very constructively on this report on small-scale artisanal fisheries, which represent one of the traditional excellences of our countries. The socioeconomic and labour aspects for coastal territories are multiple. We shouldn't ignore them. Through specific protective action, particularly in these difficult economic times for the whole fisheries sector, we need to continue this. And this is why we're totally against the purely ideological approaches, looking at fuels, etc. We just heard this a few moments ago from one of the previous speakers, for certain types of vessels which would simply bring into risk all fisheries activities, which is seeing these huge cost increases to begin with. This is a critical juncture for fisheries, and member states and the European institutions have to set up a system which is able to bring economic, financial and environmental interests together and support the activity in this sector. Thank you. Now we have our colleague, Mr. Giarrusso. You have the floor. Artisanal fishing has a crucial role to play. It represents 66% of the fishes and a huge number of the vessels as well. It's crucial to food security and is of strategic importance for socio-economic progress in coastal communities and for protecting the traditional local cultures. To guarantee the survival of artisanal fisheries, we need immediate measures. We need to support incomes as well. There are many aspects involved, but we would call that the value chain should be strengthened. There should be guaranteed prices to guarantee fair income. There should be short channels used as well. There should be support programs to reduce the cost of production, even in the light of fuel increases. There have to be, we have to try and support people towards their pensions as well, even during rest periods for the fishing areas. And artisanal fisheries in areas such as Mata del Valle, Shaka, etc., is a cultural heritage which has to be protected. Without genuine support, which is easily obtained from Europe, it may die out, though, with huge damage caused. Thank you. Thank you. And now Mr. Milan Mon.
Thank you. 2022 was called by the United Nations General Assembly the International Year of Small-Scale Fishermen. However, I fear that the sector has very little to celebrate. We have multiple crises linked to Brexit, COVID, the war on Ukraine, the impact of inflation on prices and fuel. And this report accurately provides a diagnosis of everything that the sector is suffering from. And I congratulate the rapporteur, Mr. Pimenta Lopes, for drawing attention to the need for safety on board the vessels and working conditions for the people working in the sector, and the problem of the subsidies for fuel. Now, there's a further point regarding the status of Cofradías Pescadores, the fishing cooperatives, which need to benefit from official formal status and recognition. I do hope that the European Commission will take on board our proposals for the common fisheries policy. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to refer to my region, Ribeira, which is in my autonomous community of Galicia. I visited my constituents some time ago, and I visited a fish auction house, and I saw just how important the sector is for that locality. But the mayor of Ribeira told us that without fishing, we are nothing. So it's true that the European Union administration needs to take this seriously and support the livelihoods of coastal communities that depend on fishing.
Thank you. And now the floor goes to Mr. Kelleher.
I welcome this report, in particular the call for additional supports and policy changes for small-scale fishers. And this is incredibly important to maintain their viability, and they play a huge role in coastal communities throughout the European Union. And speaking of additional supports and quota and viability, I want to implore the EU Commission and Member States not to ignore the needs of commercial Irish fishers. Negotiations are currently ongoing over granting access to Norwegian boats to Irish waters to catch considerable amounts of blue whiting. Norway are looking for 450,000 tonnes, 60% of which will be caught in Irish waters. Ireland currently has a quota of 48,000 tonnes and no prospect of additional blue whiting quota under the current deal. This deal does nothing for Irish fishers and the industry in general. In the interest of fairness and parity esteem, Irish fishers should get two things as part of this deal: additional blue whiting quota. At the minimum, it must be doubled to at least 100,000 tonnes. And secondly, additional quota in other species, as Ireland lost out heavily as part of the Brexit fishing deal. Our fishers need additional quota to maintain viability of their families and the future of coastal fishing in Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you. And now our colleague, Mr. Markey.
Chair, Commissioner, I'd like to welcome this new report on small-scale fisheries. They play an enormous role in our local communities. They employ local crews. The multiplier they bring into the economy through is selling seafood in the local restaurants, enhance tourism and preserve a culture and a tradition that's very important. They've faced many challenges in recent years through COVID, Brexit and energy crisis, no different than any other business. But this CFP review offers an opportunity for small fisheries, particularly under Article 17, where we can ensure that small fisheries get resources and indeed quotas specifically allocated toward them. In relation to Ireland, the abundance of bluefin tuna that's in Irish waters and virtually the minimum amount of it that's collected by Irish fisheries. We need to ensure that international trawlers aren't reaping the benefit of that it comes to the local indigenous community that has been hit so hard by the impact of Brexit. If you look also in relation to the Norwegian situation, where Norwegian fisheries are looking to access Irish waters, 400,000 tonne of fisheries, we need to address this. Irish fisheries have a tiny percentage compared to that, and this needs to be addressed. Small-scale fisheries represent 76% of the fleet. They represent 50% of the jobs, and yet they only catch 5.8% of the fish. They are the least damaging environmentally, and they need to be regarded and supported, as does fisheries in general in Ireland, who has been so badly impacted by Brexit. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, und wir fahren fort mit Herrn Kollegen Bijou. Bitte schön.
Thank you. Mr. Bijou.
Bonsoir, Madame la Présidente. Madame.
Good evening, President, Commissioner. Once again, I'm going to denounce the awful working condition of fishers in the overseas territories. We can't talk about fisheries in Europe without making it clear that the fishers in the overseas territories are also Europeans, and they don't have big vessels. They have old, out-of-date equipment. They have nothing to do with the pirates who pillage our oceans. The least we can do is help them. So we've got to stop this terrible game of ping-pong between Brussels and Paris, where everybody says the ball is in the other person's court, because we're endangering the lives of our fishers. We're discouraging young people who want to take over, and we're making an essential link in the chain of autonomy increasingly fragile. We have to make sure that we can renew the fleet of small fishing vessels in the overseas territories. It's essential. Thank you very much. Mr. Sokol.
Poštovana potpredsjednice.
Vice President, Commissioner, colleagues. Fisheries is part of identity of many EU member states. In Croatia, my country, it has been there since the antique times, Greek and Roman times, and it is part of Mediterranean lifestyle and also part of the tourist offer. Unfortunately, many problems of fishermen, especially in small coastal fisheries, have grown worse due to geopolitical circumstances. Fishermen have small income, uncertain working conditions, and this is not an appealing profession for young people. The blue diesel price is directly impacting this sector. Therefore, we need fast and quick support for fisheries and tax relief for fuel and also for freezing and storing capacities. Also, the average age of the fishing fleet is 32 years, which reduces their competitiveness. Therefore, it is key that the European Commission provides for additional subsidies to answer these challenges. I support this support, and I believe that this is a strategic activity, part of our identity, and needs to be preserved for the coming generations. Thank you.
Damit kommen wir zum Catch the Eye-Verfahren.
That brings us to Catch the Eye. Mr. Kimbopoulos, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, well, we're talking about the situation of small-scale artisanal and coastal fisheries, and we have to remember the illegal activities of Turkish fishing vessels in Greek waters. They enter and fish illegally in our waters, and very often they refuse to work together with the Greek authorities, and this affects the economic competitiveness of small-scale fisheries and undermines the interests of small communities. But we have to remember that this is just one of the acts of the Turkish government and the work of President Erdogan. It threatens security and stability in the region, and this is why it cannot remain without a response. We want a clear answer, a clear message to go out to Turkey, talking about this illegal fisheries and saying that we should also ban the imports of illegally fished fish from Turkey into the Union.
Valean.
That brings us to the Commissioner.
Wir haben das Wort.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you very much, Madam President, honorable members. Thank you very much for your intervention and comments. It was very interesting for me to listen to you all. I took very good note on everything you said. Let me say first a few words on the future perspectives for our small-scale and coastal fishers. Ensuring generational renewal of well-trained fishers is essential and will be one of the key tasks we'll need to address jointly in the coming years. And we will only succeed if the sector, and in particular the general working environment, is perceived as attractive, and if hard working conditions, and especially safety, are improved. Through the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund and the new European Maritime Fisheries and Agriculture Fund, we are offering support to improve the working conditions on board, while of course respecting the capacity limits of the vessels, and we encourage Member States to use this support. There is also a wide offer available to promote training and skills to enable fishers to fish in a safer environment. This is a very important aspect, especially at the beginning of our European Year of Skills, and can be supported in a very broad context beyond the fisheries funds. I'm thinking in particular of the European Social Fund Plus, Erasmus Plus, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and the Just Transition Fund. Honourable members, small-scale coastal fisheries are part of the backbone of our European fisheries and our coastal communities, and they are a strong part of our cultural identity. Indeed, it is our joint responsibility to make them fit for the future, and our common fisheries policies, along with the EU funds available, will continue to support them. Thank you once again for this debate and for your important contribution to our common task. Thank you.
Der Dank ist auf unserer Seite. Und zum Abschluss.
Thank you. And finally, I'll give the floor to Mr. Pimenta Lopes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. At the end of this debate, allow me to just pick out a few recommendations and points from the report. The CMO, short-circuit value chains and making the most of the value generated by the fishermen, limiting losses and income loss, and compensation for salaries through additional social security rights. Inclusion in the POSE for these coastal fishermen, and inclusion for outermost regions, given the additional costs of isolation. Additional cutting of red tape within the EMFAF, and trying to make sure that financing is available and that overall amount should be increased for this sector. Increased engine power should be possible when it's duly justified. Support for storage, freezing or refrigeration should be available to ensure that it can feed into the fish processing sectors. Let me make a few suggestions for the Commissioner. It's important that we move away from dogmas, that idea of inadequate small-scale fishermen or sectors that can't be properly controlled, and these one-size-fits-all approach to regulation. We must depart from past inertia, move to see things on the ground, see the situation on the ground, do more than just take pictures, and delve deeper to understand the real issues faced by the sector, understand why this support isn't reaching those who most need the support. And the EMFAP can't be used by the fishermen, then the measures themselves will be rendered useless. We need to reduce the environmental impact, and that can be done by supporting the fleet renovation, which is something the European Commission has been rejecting. There are many, many demands on the side of small-scale fishermen, and it's now time that the Member States take concrete action to respond. Thank you.
Die Aussprache ist damit